Hello, and welcome back to things no one, or at least not most people, cares about. First of all, we just hit 300 subscribers, so thank you guys so much. Like, genuinely thank you to each and every one of you who subscribe and who watch my videos. Like, I really appreciate it, like, so much. Also, side note, I'm thinking of calling our little family, like, the little no ones, the little nobodies, like, kind of as like a wordplay with the channel name. Let me know what you guys think. But anyways, today I'm going to be continuing the review series and reviewing Professor Layton and the Diabolical box, or Pandora's box. I really don't get why that was so, like, needing localization, but whatever. Again, I'm going to be using the same criteria that I used in the last video, which again was coming from this Nancy Drew game channel called Vote for Holt, so check them out if you like Nancy Drew. But the criteria I'm looking at are premise, characters, puzzles, music, atmosphere, and ending or endgame. And then I'm going to give a game rating of like A, B, C, D, F, and then like S tier if it's really amazing. So let's get into it. So the premise, this game starts out with Layton receiving a letter from his friend Dr. Schrader. The letter tells of the Elysian box, which is a box rumored to kill all who open it, and Schrader's like, I'm writing this because I'm gonna open it. The box kills him and he's like dead, so Luke and Layton, it's not funny, Luke and Layton decide to like go over there and they investigate Schrader's apartment. But there's no box, but they find a ticket for this famous train, the Voluntary Express. They decide to track the box. So to do this, they ride the Voluntary Express, and the first stop is a little town called Dropstone. It's got more to it than meets the eye, as does every town in this franchise. And then well, another thing is that they've decided to leave Flora behind, which we'll get into, but they decide to do that because they suck, but Flora decides to follow them because she doesn't suck. But in Dropstone, she was missing momentarily. She comes back. That'll become relevant later. And also in Dropstone, we see the town celebrating their 50-year anniversary, and we see Katya, the mayor's daughter, board the train. After Dropstone, we sneak into the VIP train car and head to the secret town of Falsense, which is another weird town that has an apparent vampire problem. So that was like a longer premise than Curious Village, because Curious Village is just like, I don't know, find this treasure in this guy's will. But kind of like that game, the premise like morphs. So honestly, I was like, I don't really know where the premise ends, because, you know, first the premise is to locate this Elysian box and learn how it killed Dr. Schrader, just kind of like learn like what the heck's up with this box and like what happened with him, how did it kill him, stuff like that. But then it kind of turns into like what's going, like there's something up with Dropstone's somehow connected to the box, this train's somehow connected to the box, like there's a secret in Falsense, why is this town like all mysterious and like hidden? And I love this premise. I honestly love how it's like very hard to like mark where the premise ends, because to me that's the sign that it's like seamless pacing, because the story morphs really well into something bigger. Another thing I love about this is that it like raises the stakes of Curious Village, because to me it's like the perfect mix of mundane while also again like being more than just a locating a treasure in a will. Like, yeah, like the box, it's a box that like kills people. I guess that's pretty like outlandish, but at the same time it's just like a simple matter of locating an object and investigating a folktale, but the box kills people. So to me, it's like the perfect mix. I love the premise, and I also love how the premise lays out very quickly what the main aspects are. Like I said, like we know there's a box that kills people, kind of. I don't know, it's a mystery. We know that this train relates. We know that Dropstone relates, but we have like we have no clue how they all interconnect. Again, comparing it to Curious Village is like more than just a mystery of like the will, and like, yeah, the town's a little bit weird, but like, I don't know, this one's a lot more complicated. And it's also not too outlandish at first, as opposed to like the next game that's like, oh, kidnapped the prime minister and took him to the future. Like, we'll get to that, but I don't know. I think it's a perfectly located premise between like the mundane and the crazy or outlandish. So that's how I rate the premise. So now let's get into characters. Characters is a very strong aspect of this game, although it's kind of hard to separate characters from like end game or ending. So some of the characters I'm not going to fully discuss until I get to the end game. Obviously we have Luke and Layton again, and like with Curious Village, there's not really any like big movement in terms of character development, but like I said last time and like I'll say this time, I think that's totally fine because that's kind of what the whole like prequel series is devoted to, like building up their character and like more character development. We also have Flora, and I'm gonna take a little minute to get on a soapbox about her because I really love Flora. In this game we see like her spunk and her feistiness that we didn't really have time to see in Curious Village, and so Flora, like by all her own actions, is independent, self-motivated, and capable. Like she decides to follow them on the Voluntary Express, which is pretty crazy when you consider she's like, what, 10 to 14, somewhere in that range. Like she wasn't with them at Schrader's apartment, so she like snooped on them to like figure out what their plan was, bought a ticket, like got herself to the train station, got on the train, did that all like by herself to follow them because they're stupid and decided to leave her behind. But my problem is that there's a disconnect between that like very strong, independent, feisty, like self-motivated character and like how like the events that like happen to her, like how the game treats her, I guess. Like she's kind of kidnapped and like forced into the damsel in distress role fairly often, and we see that in this game. I just think it's like very unfair, honestly. I also don't know, like Luke to me would be such an easier target. Like Luke relies on the professor a lot, whereas like Flora again shows that she's like very independent. I also have a huge problem with how Layton is like constantly leaving her behind. It's honestly such bullshit. Like you're her legal guardian. Him and Luke don't really like treat her with the respect that like an individual just deserves, let alone like your own kind of like child, basically. Because like Luke has his parents, like he's just Layton's apprentice, and he should be treating Flora he should be giving Flora a lot more attention than he does Luke, in my opinion. And like spoiler for half of the game, Flora is actually Don Paolo in disguise, and when he's unmasked, he makes this like great point where he's like, don't worry about Flora, like she's fine, she's back in Dropstone, but she's probably pissed that you guys didn't realize I was her in disguise for this long. And like, he is so right. Like again, Layton is her guardian, Luke's probably her best friend, and they just didn't know. Like I get that this is fairly soon after Curious Village, so you know they haven't known her for too long, but even when like Don Paolo / Flora is like, oh, I'm not feeling well, I'll stay behind in the hotel, like Luke and Layton are like, peace, sick, bye, like rest well, I guess. Like no one's concerned, they don't really like ask about her, they don't care about her. It really pisses me off. And as like, so that's like the in-game reasons why I'm annoyed, but as like I'm annoyed that I don't get to see her more often. Like I like when she's in games, I think she's a fun character and I would like to see her more often. That really pisses me off. So that's my little rant about Flora in this game specifically. Moving on to Don Paolo in this game, I have a lot nicer things to say about him and then in Curious Village. In this game, he's woven in like throughout the entire plot, and to me, it actually feels like he has a purpose in plot reasons. You guys did bring up in the comments like some things you liked about Don Paolo's character, and I appreciated that. It did change my perspective a little bit, but like a lot of you guys said, he like brings excitement when he like, you know, attacks you with like the Ferris wheel in the first one, which I agree with, that's a good point. But in terms of actually driving the plot along, I still am gonna have to say that he doesn't really do much plot wise in Curious Village. Like you could take him out and the story would be basically the same. This game, that's like just not true at all. Like again, another spoiler, but like we learn that he was the one who stole the box from Dr. Schrader's apartment, and he like followed Layton, I guess, to like get closer to the mystery and to like figure out what's up with the box, because I think he was like too much of a chicken to open it himself. So he's kind of the whole reason that this plot happens. Like he's not responsible for Dr. Schrader dying, but like that part still would have been the same. But like if he wasn't part of this, Dr. Schrader would have been dead and we would have just walked in and found the box. We wouldn't have like had any reason to go on this whole journey. Him stealing the box is the whole thing. And when Layton unmasks him, he drops the box when he's like fleeing Chelmy and Barton, and that's why we have the box. So, you know, he's important in this game, and he does not have as many slapstick moments in this, which I appreciate. He's like more toned down. I like that better in this game. But that brings us to Chelmy and Barton. Again, this is the real Chelmy, unlike last game where it was just Don Paolo in disguise. Although, like I said last video, Chelmy is like basically the same in this game as he was in the last one. He's, you know, gruff and I would say like averagely smart, maybe slightly smarter than average. But he has very little patience for what he views as like interference from Layton and Luke. And Barton is kind of like his little sidekick constable. He is extremely bumbling and incompetent, but like very funny and endearing and sweet. Honestly, like Barton's almost in these games to make Chelmy seem smart, and Chelmy is in these games to make Layton seem like very clever, which I guess is a purpose. Like they provide information back and forth to each other, which is nice. Like we can learn things through Chelmy instead of having to like do the legwork ourselves, which answers a lot of questions. So fine characters. I like them. They're in the next game too. Then we have Mr. Beluga, who's the owner of the Voluntary Express, and he's just like classic kind of greasy, ruthless businessman. He ends up being very integral to the story, and we slowly start piecing together like the story and how he fits in relating to the box and relating to False Sense. Part of that we learn, I guess like 75% of the way through, is that, maybe even earlier, but he's the brother of Anton Hertzen, so he's actually originally from False Sense. I don't like him as like a character. You're not really supposed to like him as a character, but I love how he fits in. Like, I love his connection and the connection to why the Voluntary Express secretly goes to False Sense. I love that. We'll get into that later in the end game. That brings us to Anton Hertzen, who is my favorite character in these games. Oh my god, I love him so much. He's basically like the head honcho in False Sense, but in a very like removed way. Like he's not like a mafia boss or like a mob boss or even like a political figure. He just like looms over the town. Like I mentioned that this town has like a vampire problem, and Anton is the purported vampire, although they never really say that, but they're just like, well, like the vampire lives in that castle up there, and you're like, okay, whose castle is that? And you're like, oh, that's Hertzen Castle, or like Hertzen Manor or whatever, and it's like, oh, so he's the vampire. I don't know. I love him. He's got such a cool story, such a sad story. Again, I'll get more into why I love him in the endgame and why I love his story, but all you need to know right now is that he's cool and epic, and I loved him. We also have Katya. She is from Dropstone. She's like the daughter of the mayor in Dropstone, and you also know that she has a link, and her grandma has a link to False Sense, and she comes on the train to False Sense. Again, more on her later. We also have all the villagers in False Sense too. There is the burlesque dancer who deserves to go to jail for flirting with Luke. They just didn't, I don't know whose idea that was, but it didn't need to be in the game. Other than her though, everyone else is cool. They're weird in the same way that Curious Village villagers are weird, but like they all feel darker, kind of. Like we also see Stash and Scarfin again, and Pavel, and this is fun, and I love them. And another character I'll like just mention is Babette on the train is so fucking annoying. I hate her. I know some people like her. She just really annoys me. I hate how she's always like that. I don't know. She annoys me. She's like, like, she's annoying. Again, it's like a very solid ensemble of characters, but like, I guess in terms of like ranking or like comparing them, because there's also the Dropstone characters, is like the Dropstone characters are like very similar in like vibe to Saint Mystere characters from Curious Village, where like they all seem like they're from a small town, but like, and they're like have that same like weird feeling that all characters in this series do. But then there's the False Sense characters that are darker and have this like sadness that goes along with how False Sense is this town that used to be like bustling and like it was on the map for like mining, and that's not the case anymore. I'll get more into that in Atmosphere, but they're great. Like Dropstone and the train characters too, again, like I said, are more comparable to Saint Mystere, but False Sense, they just feel a lot more like fleshed out and like heavy, and I really like that. Moving on to puzzles. Puzzles, I would say, are pretty on par with Curious Village, if not slightly harder, but I think they're better. Some of the like reoccurring puzzles in this game are like pancake stacking, which is variation on like, I forget what it's called, but it's like a tower puzzle. Another series is board splitter, which this is like a fun one. I like this one a lot, where you have like a weird shaped board and you have to find a way to cut the board so that you can make like a nice square or like rectangle or something. And then there's the other recurring one is peg solitaire, which this can be really hard. I definitely had to, well, I didn't have to, but I definitely like used hints on this one. But once you like learn the logic to these puzzles, it's a lot easier to solve them. Basically you're gonna always like want to be moving into the center, but basically it's like you hop over things to delete things until you only want one left. This is a type of puzzle that comes up a lot later in the series and has some really interesting variations, but I like that. My favorite puzzles are on the path to Hearts and Castle, all the puzzles that come up in the forest. These come in series as well. Like I love the slippery crossings and the light the way puzzles a lot. I really like them. I think they're fun. They're fun every time. It's not the type of puzzle that like you just remember the solution and you just like type it in and you're like, okay, cool. It's like just fun to like physically do. I also really like the garbage disposal puzzle, which is a lot like the princess one from Curious Village. There's a couple more of those. There's also Get the Key Out. The train swap puzzle that actually gets you 2 false ends is a fun one in my opinion. The one puzzle in this game that I like can never wrap my head around, and I literally always end up cheating because I can never remember the solution, I can never get it, is fair compensation. It's a lot like Camera in the Case from Curious Village. I don't think there's anything wrong with this puzzle, but it's just very difficult for me to get. It's just one of the ones that my brain just doesn't work well with. But to me, this game improves on the puzzles in Curious Village. There's nothing like the Puzzled Aliens puzzle I talked about, where you just have to know what like a circle drawing compass is to get the solution. There's very few duds in this game. I think the puzzles are a lot more interactive too. I feel like there's a lot more ones where you're like doing things on the screen, which I appreciate more than just like fill in the answer or select the answer puzzles. And I think that the puzzles that come in like multiples, like the pancake one and peg solitaire, are just stronger and better puzzles than the ones in Curious Village. I did want to take a second to touch on mini games. I forgot to do this with Curious Village review just because the mini games in that game are like very boring. Like in that game, there's the painting one, there's Gizmo, and then like the inn. And they're more of just like little things to do rather than like mini games, I would say. But this game has, I think, my favorite mini games. In this game, there's the camera, where you get camera parts throughout the game and then you like slowly put them together. And once you have the camera assembled, that unlocks like a thing where you can do like spot the difference type puzzles, which can actually be really hard. And then once you do that, like if you click on the differences in the actual location, you can unlock new puzzles. So I like that one. There's a lot of parts to that mini game. I think it's fun. There's the tea mini game, which is fun. Definitely not my favorite mini game of all time, but what I like about this mini game is that even if you don't really like it, it's like very easy to complete and like not super time consuming. The only time consuming thing about that is sometimes it can be hard to trigger. Like you have to wait until characters have a symbol over their head before you can offer them tea, and sometimes you have to like exit and enter an area multiple times before that comes up, and that can be like very annoying. Like towards the end when there was only one person left, I had to just like keep leaving and coming back before it would trigger. It was super annoying. But to me, that's like better than like the, I'll get into this later with their respective games, but the storybook one, like the sticker one, and then the bunny plays one from Miracle Mask. I hate those. And not only do I hate those, but those are so tedious and long to complete if you don't like them. This one at least is so easy. If you don't want to actually solve it, you can look up cheats, quickly mix all the tea recipes, look up who wants what tea, and then just do it. Simple. My favorite one in this game though is the hamster mini game, which I think is so fun. I love that the hamster is like sassy. I think he's my favorite animal that we meet throughout these games. And one thing that I think is fun is he's actually voice acted. Like the bunny in Miracle Mask is not voice acted. Neither is the fish or the bird, I don't think. So he's the only like voice acted minigame animal. I think I'm right on that. And I think that just adds something. It's just fun. I like him. I think he's fun. And I also like how it introduces like the idea of like keeping an animal healthy. I think it's such like a small little like moral thing for a kid's game, but I think it's important because a lot of times like kids, I'm a big pet lover, I love animals, but like kids will get animals that they aren't ready to take care of, and so I think it's cool that we get this hamster by way of the chef being like, I am overfeeding him and it's not good for him and he needs a better home. And then we work to like get him healthy. I I don't know, it's just a small little touch, and I like it. I appreciate it. We don't get that with any of the other mini games. There's like no real life lesson to like teaching a rabbit how to like be a circus animal. I don't know. I just like it. Now we'll move on to music. And music is kind of similar to puzzles in that the music in this game improved upon the music in Curious Village, which was already amazing. If you remember, the one critique about music in Curious Village that I had was that the music in that game kind of all blended together, and it was hard to, oh my god, it was hard to like pick out songs individually, at least for me. But I did say also that it made sense for that game because you're basically in the same, sorry, people are screaming outside. You're basically in the same setting and same like atmosphere and mood for the whole game in Curious Village, so it makes sense that the music follows that trend. But in this game, you have a multitude of settings and atmospheres, so likewise you have like a multitude of soundtracks that, in my opinion, are like very distinct. Although I would say that they're split into like two main categories, which is like cheerful and like decidedly not cheerful. On the cheerful end of these songs, the highlights for me are Voluntary Express, The Village of Dropstone, and Time for a Break. Time for a Break is probably my favorite of the cheery songs. It plays when you're making tea, and maybe for all mini games, although I might be wrong on that. It's just like fun, and again, I really remember it playing with the tea mini games, and the tea unlocks only once you're in Fall Sense, so it's like really fun to, like, it's a perfect title, Time for a Break. Like, it feels like you're taking a break from like the dreary, like crushing weight of the mood and eeriness in Fall Sense. It's just fun. That song also gets stuck in my head a lot. I think it's fun. Then speaking of the dreary parts and dreary Fall Sense, the highlights of those tracks are Fall Sense, The Dark Forest, which might be my favorite of the dreariness, and the Elysian Box theme, although that one is like more like upbeat, kinda. I don't know. It's just fun. You also get some good diegetic music that's like actually happening in the universe. Like, I think maybe it's actually only the ball music, but I think that's fun. It's not really cheerful or dreary, but like, it's good. I don't know what it is. I also love the True Fall Sense track. It plays right after like everything is explained, kind of, and it's so short, but it's such like a like dawn is breaking moment. Like the wool has been pulled off of everyone's eyes, and I think after this song, yeah, in Fall Sense it's dark the whole time, and then this song plays as the sun is rising over Fall Sense, which is kind of part of atmosphere, but it's so beautiful. I love this song. The track that kills me the most, kills me every time, it killed me as I was writing my thoughts out for this video and I was listening to the soundtrack, it's called Iris, and then like in parentheses like music box version, which I don't really know why it's called that. I don't know who Iris is, honestly, but it's a beautiful song. It plays during the letter reading in the endgame from Sophia, and that letter is so heartbreaking, and this song is just equally heartbreaking. It's just like, it's just sad. It's just sad, and like, it's sad in such a loving way. I don't know. It sounds weird. I don't know how else to describe it. It's perfect. Like I said, this game has like beautiful music and it all stands alone. Like I said, it's so much easier to pull out songs from this game in your head, and to me, this music is like twice as good as the music in Curious Village, which again was already amazing. I said in the last video that I listen to these game soundtracks when I'm like doing homework and stuff or working or whatever, and this game has the most songs where like I just get distracted because it pulls me right back into the atmosphere, and like it's so engaging and good. Now to atmosphere. The atmosphere in this game is so good. I'm really trying to be fair, because if you couldn't tell, I really love this game. But I mean, atmosphere have the same like praise. It's so good. I'm gonna like go through the atmosphere in like each part, because like I said, there's a lot of locations in this game. So to start with Voluntary Express, I really like the music in on the Voluntary Express. I think the atmosphere is good. If I'm like really nitpicking, I think the things that could have been done better are like, there's some of the passenger cars that you walk through and they really all blend together, which makes sense because it's a train, so like I can't even fault it for that much for that. But the only way to like differentiate are like which doors are cracked open, and also like the stuff on the top screen. I could have done like maybe just some wall art. I don't know. That's just a small critique. I also on the train like the kitchen and the dining area as well as the caboose. It's pretty. I just thought it could have been like a little better. That's not even a critique. It's still good. Then moving on to Dropstone, it feels a lot like Saint Mystere, although Saint Mystere has like a claustrophobic vibe, like you're literally trapped in Saint Mystere and like you don't really ever see out of Saint Mystere. But Dropstone's a lot more open. There's a lot of like pretty fields and like hills, but it's like such a like small town vibe. It's just like quaint and endearing. And then there's Fall Sense, which is like borderline scary, especially when you're playing this as a kid. Fall Sense, like, dude, you step off the train, which first of all just like rolls to a stop here, and you're like nobody, the conductor or Sammy is like standing outside when you get off the train at Dropstone. Like it's normal like train departing. Here it just feels like almost like Silent Hill or something, honestly, but no one's there. You just walk out into the train station where you see old pictures of Fall Sense, and then you walk outside and it looks exactly the same as the pictures from 50 years ago. And the second you walk outside of the train station, you're just like hit with this like dark, cold, like feeling. And the music is such a big part of that. Like Fall Sense again just feels so damp and eerie, and not in an explicitly scary way, but just in like a very like lonely, it feels like an A24 movie vibe of horror, if that makes any sense. Like if you watch Midsummer, like Midsummer isn't, it feels like the beginning of Midsummer, where it's like dark and cold, and I mean some really like graphic stuff happens. Nothing graphic happens in this game, but it's like the same kind of vibe of like horror. I don't know, it's like an existential dread, honestly. Again, it's just like dis-ease and like borderline horror. I don't know. You feel this everywhere in Fall Sense though too. And it also just feels very empty. Like a lot emptier than Dropstone or Saint Mystere. Like again, Saint Mystere felt like cramped and small. There were people everywhere. And there are a lot of like villagers in Fall Sense, but it just feels like empty and sad. I don't know. The characters and the villagers like add to that, like in full sense. In Fall Sense, they're not as, they lack the like liveliness that you see in Dropstone and Saint Mystere. And even though in Curious Village that's like where people are like automatons, like here it feels like that. Like there's just kind of like a hopelessness. Like people don't really talk about even the possibility of like really rebuilding Fall Sense, but they do talk about, you know, what I talked about earlier about how Fall Sense used to be like bustling and like a great mining town, and it's just not anymore. And they're all just like the dregs of that life. It's very sad. I don't know. And it feels kind of relatable, I guess. Like there are a lot of cities everywhere like that where industries change, time change, and just like whole towns and whole families and stuff are just left behind. It's really good. Some places to point out. My favorite places in this game are all in Fall Sense. Fall Sense is by far the most atmospheric, best setting in this game. In Fall Sense, the best places for me are the Dark Forest and Hertzen Manor. I also really like the museum. It's kind of boring and it kind of like feels different, but the museum is really nice because it really like pushes the fact that the history of Fall Sense like really connects to the Elysium box, and like there's this very like anachronistic feeling in the museum. I don't know. I also love that. I don't know if this even counts as atmosphere, but like reading the diary pages that you find keys that unlock parts of this diary that you get that relates to it, this whole story. I don't think that really counts as atmosphere, but I'm gonna put it here. That's great. Great storytelling. That's kind of part of the mini games, I guess. It's in the trunk, but it's not really a game. You're just reading something very sad. I guess the one like tiny black spot in Fall Sense in terms of atmospheres. There's this one area that I think it's like north something. It's at the top of the map, and sometimes you see the mailman from Dropstone there, where you can, there's nothing to do there except for talk to the mailman, and he could be anywhere, honestly. But you can see like over this hill, and it looks like it connects to like a whole other half of Fall Sense. And this just like feels off to me because again, it like shows that like you're only seeing part of Fall Sense, and it makes Fall Sense look like twice as big as it already seems. But it already seems pretty big and empty, and I just like don't. I just don't like that area. Like there's no. If you could just delete that little road on the map so that it looks like you're seeing all of Fall Sense, and that would be better. But again, I'm like really nitpicking with that, but I'm trying to be fair. But closing up atmosphere. Atmosphere is just better than in Curious Village, in my opinion, and in most other games. Sorry. To me, but yeah, it's just better for a few reasons. Like, first, there's a lot more areas, and this, I mean, not only makes it more interesting just by way of, like, there's more stimuli to be interested by, but also, like, it starts to highlight how eerie Fall Sense is when you compare it to, like, London at the very, very beginning of the game, or, like, Dropstone, or the Military Express, even. And it also makes you feel, like, very distance from everything. Like, you see the journey going from London to Dropstone to Fall Sense. Like, you get more distance, and that adds to the eeriness. Whereas, like, with Saint Mystere, you just are shown arriving there. You're never shown, like, the road there. I have no clue how far away Saint Mystere is from London or anything. And also with this game, like, it kind of takes with what, like, Curious Village did with, like, the comparison and the contrast between, or really just the contrast between Saint Mystere and, like, the tower, in terms of, like, vibes and, like, eeriness. But it's, like, more severe when you're comparing Dropstone to Fall Sense, and it just, that adds so much, especially when you know the backstory of what Dropstone is and how it was founded. It just adds so much. I love it. So now we'll move into Endgame. And Endgame, my rating for the Endgame is kind of complicated. I'd say it's where the game is strongest, but also where a lot of people say it's the weakest and where it falls short. So I don't really know where you would say the endgame starts, but I'm gonna say it kind of starts when we head to Hertzen Castle and meet Anton Hertzen, aka the vampire. And we have dinner with him, and he's just like suave and cool, and I love it. I love this whole part of the game. And he asks us to like kind of stay the night, and does the whole thing that they do in, like, I think of like Haunted Mansion, like the Eddie Murphy movie, where they're like, it's too dangerous to leave, you have to stay the night. And that night you have like a really good dream where it's like not even, they're like, is this a dream or not? That's one of the things that I guess is kind of answered by the ending, but there's a lot of kind of plot holes, which is the weak parts, and I guess that kind of wanted to like, okay, sorry. The dream isn't really a plot hole per se, but this game has a lot of things that aren't fully explained, that some people think that's a problem. The dream is kind of one of them, but either way, the dream is really cool. And if you've been reading the diary pages, you know what you like know what that dream is about. Because the diary page is all about Anton and his love, Sophia. Although you don't really like know that when you're reading the diary, I don't think, but you slowly start to piece that together. And this is the ball where they danced together and like met and were like in love. Very like West Side Story, Romeo and Juliet. But anyways, you have that cool dream, and then you wake up and you've been tied up by Anton, and he's like, well, I'm a vampire, so I'm going to eat you. But we obviously escape, and we later learn he actually intended for us to escape, but because he's just like trying to keep up rumors that he's a vampire so people stop coming by, which is another plot hole because he's not eating people, so why does he think he's a vampire? Why does he think he's not aging? I don't. But the best policy with this game is to just not ask questions, honestly. Anyways, so we escape, and on the way out we run into Katya, who again was the young woman from Dropzone. And then we bump into like Anton on the way out, and he sees Katya and he keeps calling her his beloved Sophia and like basically accuses her of cheating on him with Layton. So then Layton and Anton like fight, and then Anton like collapses and we learn everything. So basically like Anton's youth is like, he's not actually young, he's actually really old, but everybody thought he wasn't aging because of the vampire thing. Again, this story is like very complicated, and if you want like a more full explanation of the actual story, you can watch my really long video on the Professor Layton series and just like watch that game because it's too much for me to go into here. But yeah, anyways, he's not actually young, he's not a vampire, and years ago when miners struck ore, because I mentioned this was a mining town, they also struck hallucinogenic gas, and the Elysian box actually held traces of the gas, and the people who heard of the legend saying that the box was going to kill you if you opened it were expecting to see some death-causing thing and hallucinated that from the gas and had a heart attack and died. So that's why the box kills people. And Katya is the granddaughter of Anton and Sophia. So Anton and Sophia, like I said, fell in love, had a very like Romeo and Juliet kind of love. Because they were in love, but when the miners struck gas, people started falling ill, and Sophia realized this was unsafe. And she was secretly pregnant, and so she was like, I have to leave. And she never told Anton that she was pregnant because she knew that he wouldn't be able to leave. So she was like, well, I'm gonna leave because I have to do what's best for this baby, but he's not gonna be able to leave because he's like the head of this town, basically. Like his family is like kind of royalty in the town, and he's not gonna be able to just leave. So it would just be too hard to like for him to know that he has to abandon not only his love but his child. So she just doesn't tell him, and she like leaves in a very vague way that makes it seem like she was in love with another man. And so Anton's been like bitter this whole time, thinking that she like left him for someone else. And the Elysian box was just a normal box that he used to try to send a letter to Sophia, kind of like a gift to her. But because of the box's like value, it's like jewel encrusted and everything, it kept getting stolen, and that's why it accrued this like crazy legend. So the box has a secret compartment, because we did open the box and it was empty, but it has a secret compartment with a letter in it. So we solved the puzzle to open the secret compartment, read the letter, and this letter was actually from Sophia back to Anton, meaning that Sophia got the letter that Anton sent her and wanted to send him one back, but the box got stolen, and Sophia's dead at this point. She passed away, and that's why Katya is coming here, kind of on her behalf. And the letter explains like all of this and explains to Anton how she loved him till the very end and how she had his baby and like they have a granddaughter. This story makes me so emotional. It's so good. Again, if you haven't played this, please, even if you don't watch the full Professor Layton video, please watch just like that section of that video, because I can't explain everything here, but it's such a beautiful story, and I put some cutscenes in there too, so like please go watch that if you've never played this game, because like I'm kind of like butchering it here for sake of brevity, but anyways, it's beautiful. We also learned then that Dr. Schrader isn't dead, was like low-key in a coma, which is just so funny. I'm like, Layton, did you not think to check? Are you kidding me? He was just like, yeah, it looks dead to me. Like, no one checked. I don't know. No one told Layton, whatever. But, anyways, he's alive. So, again, was a very kind of shitty explanation of this story because I think that's good. I think it's good when a story takes a long time to explain because it took a whole game to play and figure out, and it's so hard to explain it briefly because the storytelling is so good. You learn so much of this. Well, you learn a lot of it at the end, but the diary I talked about that you unlock parts of really adds to it. There's some miners notes that you read too down in the mines because you explore those. There's a lot of like little storytelling things. You see things in the museum. It's such beautiful storytelling, and that's why this game, spoiler alert, is my favorite. But like, I love it. So again, I love everything about how the story is communicated. When you look at the start and you look at how many pieces you have that ultimately have to fit in, like the puzzle, this box, the letter in the box, how Katya fits in, how Dropstone fits in, how, yeah, because, sorry, I didn't explain this because, again, it's all over the place, but Dropstone is essentially where everybody left, and Sophia left too. Everybody who was like, we can't stay in Fall Sense, people are getting sick. They didn't know it was hallucinogenic gas, but they knew people were like getting sick and everyone was starting to act weird. So a bunch of people, including Sophia, left and founded the town of Dropstone. So that's why it's noteworthy that Dropstone is having their 50th year anniversary, because this all happened 50 years ago. Like, when you see how intricately and beautifully all of these things weave together, like Mr. Beluga was Anton's brother who left too because he wasn't the eldest son, so he didn't need to stay, and he was like, fuck this, like, I'm gonna go make my name, take this wealth, and do something outside of this town that is, like, falling apart, literally. It's beautiful. That being said, as you might have noticed from my confusing explanation of this endgame, the endgame and the resolution and the whole explanation is confusing, and while I think it has a really strong story, I can concede that it raises a lot of questions. But the problem is that this game doesn't really explain any of those. Like, in Curious Village, we had that whole, as we ascended the tower, Layton goes through and explains a lot of things, and that solves a lot of the mysteries, and you have the mystery tab in your trunk that you keep track of. I could have just done with like a couple of sentences would have solved this all, or even like a couple of words added on to like the sentences that already were in that. But a lot of people point out that the conclusion and the explanations in this game can lead you down to a whole like rabbit hole of questions. Again, I made a whole video about plot holes in this game, or a lot of these problems in this game. That was actually really helpful because a lot of people answered the questions in the comments. I made it like a year ago. You can watch it if you want to. It is all over the place and the editing is completely different, but you can watch it if you want to. It's very short. But yeah, this game, a lot of people think this game is too outlandish, which I get. But at the same time, is it really any more outlandish than the next game? Or like any of the games in the prequel series? No. It's not, honestly. That's the series. So I think it's a little bit hypocritical, kind of, when people point this out. I agree. I agree it's outlandish, but I don't think that's like grounds for saying that this game is worse than Unwound Future. But it's already kind of contentious that I think this game is better than Unwound Future, and we'll get to that next video when I talk about Unwound Future. But sorry for this very confusing section on the end game, but overall, I love the end game, and I love the resolution 10 times more than Curious Village. There's nothing wrong with Curious Village, but I just think this one gets you more. It's such a tragic love story, and I love how many more elements there are to keep track of, and how honestly well they do at doing that. To me, it's such a beautiful and compelling love story and story in general that I'm willing to overlook some of these like more outlandish things. I'm much more willing to just say, yeah, I'm sure there's answers, and not think about it, because the story is so compelling, and I personally think that the story tugs at your heartstrings more than Unwound Future, which again is another like controversial opinion. But even if you think that that story makes you sadder, the one thing I will say about this game is, to me, it's a lot more impressive that this game makes you feel that way about characters that you don't ever meet, honestly. Like, you don't ever meet Sophia. You only meet Anton for what, 10 minutes before this happens? Like, you don't know him all that much, and The sadness that comes in the next game has to do with Professor Layton. And again, I'll get to that game, but to me it's so impressive that through storytelling alone, they could make such a compelling story that doesn't rely on your pre-existing attachment to any characters. To me, that's just so impressive. So, I love it. I love it. Sue me. I love it. I love a tragic love story, and I love this game. So, conclusion. I'm not going to spend too much time on the conclusion in the rating section because if you've been paying any attention at all, the answer's pretty obvious. This game is S tier to me. It could never, literally never be anything else to me. Like, the premise is amazing. The characters are amazing. The puzzles are actually, I think, my favorite puzzles throughout the entire game. I'll think about that. The only one that might beat it out would be Unwound Future, so I'll revisit that next video. But I love the puzzle in this game. The music, perfect. This music is definitely my favorite of all the music. Atmosphere, perfect. Endgame, in my opinion, perfect. Don Paolo, like, he has a purpose here. When you think about my critiques for Curious Village, Don Paolo has a purpose here. Nothing feels unnecessary. Nothing breaks the atmosphere. You still have comedic elements in Sammy, the like train conductor, and like some other characters and moments, but it never feels inappropriate or just like now is not the time. Like, you never feel like that. I love the mini games. The ending is, again, slightly out there, but to me it's no more out there than any of the other endings or like things in this series. The story to me is perfectly paced, it's perfectly complex, and there are journal pages and other types of like literature that enhance the story if you read them, but you're not forced to read them. So you're not like bogged down in terms of pacing if you don't want to read them. You could just not read them. You don't need them for anything. It just adds to like the lore and to the atmosphere and to the story. Literally every critique I had with Curious Village isn't present here, and every critique I will have for the next game also isn't present here. To me, the game is just, it's perfect. It's absolutely my favorite Layton game, maybe even my favorite game of all time. I love replaying this game. I love this game. So yeah, let me know what you guys think about this game down in the comments below. Although I will say, if your comments mostly relate to comparing this game to Unwound Future, I'm going to ask that you, or Unwound or Lost Future, whatever, I'm going to ask that you wait until I do that for the next video, just to hear what I have to say about that game too. But I'd love to know what you think about this game. This game, can't say it enough. I love this game. Anyways, thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't yet subscribed, subscribe. If you like this video, like it. Thank you. Alright, bye.